It's a Tuesday morning on the Liverpool waterfront. The Mersey is grey and wide and moving fast, the way it always moves, the way it has always moved. 3 buildings stand on the waterfront behind you: the Royal Liver Building, the Cunard Building, the Port of Liverpool Building, the Three Graces they call them. Built in the first decades of the 20th century, when Liverpool was one of the most powerful port cities on earth and wanted the world to know it. Today, the Albert Dock behind them is restaurants and apartments, and the Tate Liverpool and a Beatles museum. The cranes are gone. The ships are gone. The 40,000 dock workers who once loaded and unloaded the commerce of an empire are gone. But the buildings remain, and the river remains. And the river remembers everything. To understand Liverpool, to understand what it was, what it became, what it cost, you need to understand the water. Everything about this city begins with the water, and everything about this city eventually returns to it. Using AI to reconstruct historical images and engravings, we are going to walk Liverpool from its earliest origins to the city it is today. We will follow the ships across the Atlantic. We will stand on the dock in 1750 and understand exactly what is being loaded and unloaded and at what human cost. We will follow the city to the peak of its wealth and power. We will sit in a terraced house in the Dingle in 1960 and listen to 4 young men work out something new on cheap guitars. And we will watch what happens when the trade that built everything disappears and the city is left to find another reason to exist. This is the complete story of Liverpool. Let's begin. It is the early 12th century. On the eastern bank of the Mersey estuary, where a small creek called the Pool runs into the river, there is nothing. A few fishing families, perhaps. Marshland. The creek silting up with each tide. In 1207, King John needs a port to supply his military campaigns in Ireland. He looks at the map of the northwest English coast and he chooses the Pool. On the 28th of August, 1207, he issues a royal charter establishing a new borough. He calls it Liverpool, the Muddy Pool. 7 streets are laid out in an H shape on the land between the Pool and the Mersey. Burgesses are invited to settle, given plots of land in exchange for rent and military service. A castle is built on the ridge above the river. A chapel dedicated to Our Lady and St. Nicholas, patron saint of sailors, is established near the waterfront. For 300 years, Liverpool grows slowly. It is a minor port. Chester, further south, is more important. Bristol, on the western coast, is far larger. Liverpool is useful for Ireland and not much else. In 1644, during the English Civil War, the town is besieged and taken by Prince Rupert for the Royalists. It changes hands several times. 1,200 people live here. It is unremarkable. Then, in the second half of the 17th century, everything begins to change. The change begins not in Liverpool, but in the Caribbean. Sugar plantations on Barbados and Jamaica, worked by enslaved Africans, are producing extraordinary profits for their English owners. The demand for enslaved labor is growing faster than the existing supply routes from West Africa can meet it. London and Bristol are the established ports of the slave trade. Liverpool is newer, hungrier, cheaper. Its merchants look at the Atlantic trade and see an opportunity that Bristol and London are not yet fully exploiting. The first documented Liverpool slave trading voyage leaves the port in 1699. The ship is called the Liverpool Merchant. It carries a cargo of goods to West Africa. It returns with enslaved people. The mathematics of this trade are simple and devastating, and Liverpool's merchants understand them immediately. A ship leaves Liverpool carrying cotton cloth, iron bars, copper pots, glass beads, firearms and alcohol. Manufactured goods worth a modest sum in England, but in high demand on the West African coast. These goods are traded for enslaved human beings, men, women and children, captured in warfare or kidnapping, sold by African merchants and rulers to European traders on the coast. The enslaved people are loaded onto the ship. The crossing from West Africa to the Americas, the Middle Passage, takes between 6 and 12 weeks. The people are packed into the hold, chained, lying in spaces roughly the size of a coffin. They are given minimal food and water. They cannot stand, cannot turn over without permission, cannot use a toilet. Disease moves through the hold with lethal efficiency. On average, across the entire history of the trade, 1 in 8 people loaded onto a slave ship dies during the crossing. On some voyages, it is 1 in 3. The bodies are thrown overboard. Those who survive arrive in the Caribbean or the American South. They are sold. The money from the sales is used to buy sugar, cotton, tobacco, rum. The ship returns to Liverpool loaded with these goods. They are sold in England at enormous profit. 1 voyage, 3 legs, 3 profits. The triangular trade. Between 1699 and 1807, when Britain abolishes the trade, Liverpool slave traders make approximately 5,000 slaving voyages. They transport approximately 1.4 million enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. Not all of them survive the crossing. By the mid-18th century, Liverpool is the dominant slave trading port in the world. Not just in Britain, in the world. More enslaved people pass through Liverpool ships than through any other port on Earth. This is the foundation of modern Liverpool. Not the music, not the football, not the wit and warmth that the city is famous for today. The foundation is this: the systematic, industrialized transportation of human beings as cargo. Let us be precise about what this means for the city. The profits from the slave trade do not go only to the ship owners. They flow through the entire economy. The merchants who finance the voyages build the grand Georgian townhouses that still line Rodney Street and Abercrombie Square. The craftsmen who make the goods traded in Africa have steady employment. The rope makers, the sail makers, the shipbuilders, all of them working directly or indirectly because of the trade. The banks that finance the voyages become the insurance companies and financial institutions that will, in the 19th and 20th centuries, fund the development of the entire British economy. Liverpool Town Hall, completed in 1754, is decorated with carved stone heads of Africans on its exterior frieze. The city's wealthiest merchants commission portraits of themselves standing in front of ships. The ships have names like the Africa and the Black Prince and the Enterprise. In 1760, Liverpool's population is around 25,000. It is the second largest city in England after London. Its prosperity is unmistakable. Its source is undeniable, and some people in Liverpool know that the source is a crime. William Roscoe is born in Liverpool in 1753, the son of a market gardener. He educates himself, becomes a lawyer and banker, writes poetry, studies Italian art, and becomes one of the most prominent abolitionists in England. He writes The Wrongs of Africa in 1787, a long poem attacking the slave trade. He is elected Member of Parliament for Liverpool in 1806, specifically to vote for abolition. He does so in 1807. He is never elected again. Liverpool does not forgive him for a generation. The Slave Trade Act passes in 1807. It abolishes the trade, the transportation of enslaved people, but not slavery itself, which continues in British colonies until 1833. Liverpool's slave traders have a year's warning before the act comes into force. Some make extra voyages in the final months. The trade is abolished. The profits already made remain. Liverpool adapts. The port does not need the slave trade specifically. What it needs is trade. And trade in the 19th century is expanding faster than anyone had imagined possible. Cotton is the new commerce. Raw cotton from the American South, still grown by enslaved people until 1865, flows into Liverpool in vast quantities, destined for the mills of Manchester and Lancashire. Finished cloth flows back out through Liverpool to markets around the world. The port that built itself on slavery now builds itself on the products of slavery. The moral geography has shifted slightly. The economic geography has not moved at all. Liverpool in 1850 is extraordinary. The Albert Dock, completed in 1846, is the most advanced dock system in the world, a completely enclosed complex of warehouses and water, the first building in Britain to be constructed entirely without wood, a fire prevention measure, every surface brick and iron and stone. Ships enter through the lock gates. Goods are unloaded directly into the surrounding warehouses. Everything is controlled, measured, taxed. The efficiency is a kind of violence, the violence of capital applied to the movement of goods across the world. At the peak of its power, in the second half of the 19th century, Liverpool handles 40% of the world's trade. 40%. Ships arrive from New York, from Bombay, from Shanghai, from Melbourne, from Buenos Aires. The pilots who guide them into the Mersey are among the best paid and most skilled maritime workers in the world. The dock workers who unload them live in conditions that the pilot might not recognize as belonging to the same city. The casual labor system of the Liverpool docks is one of the most brutal employment arrangements in Victorian Britain. Every morning, before dawn, thousands of men gather at the dock gates. The foremen come out and choose. Today you work, today you don't. No contract, no guarantee, no sick pay, no pension. If you are not chosen, if you are too old, too slow, too injured from yesterday's work, if the foreman doesn't like your face, you go home to nothing. Irish immigrants, arriving in enormous numbers after the famine of the 1845, packed onto the cheapest ships, landing in Liverpool with nothing, fill the ranks of the casual labour pool. By 1851, a quarter of Liverpool's population is Irish-born. They settle in the north end of the city, in Scotland Road, in the courts and cellars around the docks. The mortality rates are catastrophic: cholera, typhus. Infant mortality so high that in some streets more than half of children die before their 5th birthday. Liverpool grows enormously through the 19th century. The population reaches 500,000 by 1880. The city spreads outward from the waterfront in rings of Victorian terraces, the quality declining the further you go from the wealth concentrated near the river. The grand civic buildings go up. St. George's Hall, completed in 1854, is one of the finest neoclassical buildings in the world. A concert hall and law courts combined, columns 40 feet high, a floor of Minton tiles, a great organ with over 7,000 pipes. It says, this city has money and intends to spend some of it on something other than ships. The Walker Art Gallery, the World Museum, the Liverpool Central Library, the universities. The wealth of empire filtered through the consciousness of men who knew, even if they didn't always say so, that some accounting was eventually due. The 20th century begins with Liverpool at the height of its power and ends with it in the deepest crisis of its history. The First World War takes the young men. The Pals battalions, the Liverpool Pals, units formed from workmates and neighbours, are shattered on the Somme and at Gallipoli. The King's Liverpool Regiment suffers casualties that the city will spend the rest of the century trying to absorb. The Depression of the 1930s hits Liverpool harder than almost anywhere in England. The port goes quiet. The dock workers stand at the gates and are not chosen. The soup kitchens reopen, then the Second World War. Liverpool is the most important port in Britain for the Atlantic convoys bringing food and materials from America. The German Air Force knows this. Between August 1940 and January 1942, Liverpool is bombed more heavily than any British city outside London. Over 4,000 people die. Entire streets are flattened. The north end of the city, where the Irish community had settled a century earlier, is devastated. After 1945, the damage is patched over rather than properly rebuilt. The port recovers briefly in the late 1940s and 1950s. The docks are busy again. The city's population reaches its peak, around 850,000 people in the wider borough. But the forces working against Liverpool are structural and cannot be patched. Containerization comes to shipping in the 1960s. Cargo that once required hundreds of dock workers to load and unload by hand is now moved in standardized steel boxes by cranes operated by a handful of men. The need for dock labor collapses almost overnight. The Albert Dock closes in 1972. The North Docks follow. The casual labor system that had been both the city's economic engine and its greatest social cruelty becomes simply irrelevant. There is no work left to be casual about. At the same time, the industries that had supplied the port, ship repair, rope making, the manufacture of goods for export, decline or disappear entirely. By 1981, Liverpool's unemployment rate is among the highest in Britain. The Toxteth riots, 5 days of the most violent civil unrest seen in England since the Second World War, explode in July of that year. Young men, predominantly black, living in a neighborhood that had been economically abandoned for a decade, facing a police force that treats them as suspects by default, reach a breaking point. Cars burn, buildings burn. The police use CS gas on British streets for the first time. Michael Heseltine, Thatcher's Environment Secretary visits Liverpool after the riots and writes a memo, famously headed simply, "It took a riot," arguing for major government investment in Liverpool's regeneration. Thatcher's Chancellor, Geoffrey Howe, writes a counter-memo suggesting that Liverpool might be beyond saving and that it might be better to manage its decline and encourage people to move away. Managed decline of a city of 500,000 people. The memo is not acted upon, but that it was written tells you something about how Liverpool was seen from London in 1981. But we need to go back to the late 1950s, because while the port is still running, while the city is still held together by the brutal routine of the docks, something is growing in the terraced streets of the south end of Liverpool that is about to change the world in a way that nobody, not the politicians, not the dock owners, not the city fathers in their Georgian townhouses, could possibly predict. Woolton is a suburb in the south of Liverpool. On the 6th of July, 1957, a church fete is held in the garden of St. Peter's Church. A skiffle band called the Quarrymen plays on a flatbed truck in the afternoon. The singer is a 16-year-old from nearby Menlove Avenue. His name is John Lennon. In the crowd is a 15-year-old from Forthlin Road, Allerton. His name is Paul McCartney. After the performance, someone introduces them. They talk about music. John is impressed by Paul's ability to tune a guitar. Paul is impressed by John's confidence. What follows from that introduction is the most commercially successful songwriting partnership in the history of recorded music. The Beatles, Lennon, McCartney, George Harrison from Wavertree, and eventually Ringo Starr from the Dingle, spend 3 years playing the clubs of Liverpool and Hamburg before anyone in London takes them seriously. The Cavern Club on Matthew Street, a basement that smells of sweat and drains, holds lunchtime sessions that 300 people cram into. The Beatles play the Cavern nearly 300 times. Brian Epstein, a Liverpool record shop owner, sees them in November 1961 and signs them as their manager. Every major record label in London turns them down. EMI's Parlophone label, almost by accident, gives them an audition. George Martin, their producer, is skeptical but professional. Love Me Do is released in October 1962. It reaches number 17 in the charts. By the end of 1963, Beatlemania has consumed Britain. By February 1964, when they appear on The Ed Sullivan Show in New York, 73 million Americans watch. 73 million. The largest television audience in American history to that point. The Beatles are products of Liverpool in ways that are easy to sentimentalize and important to understand properly. They grow up in working-class and lower-middle-class terraced streets in the south of the city. Their fathers are merchant seamen and bus drivers and cotton salesmen. They hear American music, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, country, through the records brought back by sailors docking at Liverpool from New York. The port, in its last years of real vitality, acts as a cultural pipeline connecting Liverpool directly to Black American music in a way that other British cities don't experience. The wit, the speed, the deflection, the refusal to be impressed, is specifically Scouse. Liverpool people develop, over generations of poverty and casualization and being looked down on by the rest of England, a particular defense mechanism. Make a joke before they make one about you. Treat authority with cheerful contempt. Never let anyone see that anything hurts. John Lennon has this quality in such concentrated form that it occasionally looks like cruelty. It is not, or not only. It is armor. It is what happens when you are very clever and very poor and you grow up in a city that has been told it doesn't matter. The Beatles leave Liverpool in 1963 and never really come back, not to live. But they take Liverpool with them everywhere they go. The accent, the humor, the absolute confidence, the Mancunian arrogance has a Liverpool equivalent, slightly more ironic, slightly less earnest, that they have something to say and the world should listen. The world listens. While the Beatles are becoming the most famous people on the planet, the city they came from is dying. The 1970s see the docks close one by one. The container terminal at Seaforth, opened in 1972 to handle the new containerized cargo, requires a fraction of the workforce that the old docks needed. The men who had stood at the gate every morning, been chosen or turned away, are now simply not needed in any form. The population begins to fall. It is the most reliable sign of urban crisis. When people vote with their feet, when the young leave and the old stay, and the houses stand empty. In 1931, Liverpool's population is 856,000. By 2001, it is 440,000. 400,000 people, leaving over 70 years, but accelerating catastrophically in the 1970s and 1980s. The housing clearances of the 1960s and 1970s, demolishing the Victorian terraces of the inner city, replacing them with tower blocks and peripheral estates in Kirkby and Speke and Cantrell Farm, destroy the street-level communities that had held the city together through poverty and war. The new estates quickly become places of concentrated deprivation without the social fabric that the old streets, for all their squalor, had provided. By the mid-1980s, whole streets in the inner city stand empty, entire districts abandoned. Liverpool looks, in places, like a city that has been at war. Derek Hatton and the militant tendency control Liverpool City Council from 1983 to 1987. They set an illegal budget, refuse to make cuts, go to war with the Thatcher government. The confrontation is genuine and sometimes principled and ultimately disastrous. The council is surcharged, the city's finances collapse. The political energy that might have gone into regeneration goes into a political battle that Liverpool inevitably loses. Then, in 1989, on the 15th of April, 96 Liverpool football supporters are killed in a crush at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield. Many of them are young, some of them are children. The youngest is 10 years old. The police, faced with their own catastrophic failure of crowd management, brief a compliant journalist with a story blaming the victims. The Sun newspaper publishes the headline, "The Truth." It accuses Liverpool fans of pickpocketing the dead, urinating on police officers, attacking a police officer trying to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Every word of it is fabricated. Liverpool stops buying The Sun. The boycott continues to this day. 35 years later, the newspaper remains largely unsold in the city. This is not sentimentality. This is a city that knows what it means to be lied about by people with power and has decided calmly and permanently not to participate. The truth about Hillsborough takes 23 years to be officially established. The original inquest verdicts of accidental death are finally quashed in 2012. A new inquest concludes in 2016 that the 96 were unlawfully killed. The police officer responsible for the operation is charged with gross negligence manslaughter. He is eventually acquitted. The families have spent nearly 3 decades being told that their children and fathers and brothers died because of their own behavior. They are right. The truth does eventually come out. The cost of getting it out is almost inconceivable. Liverpool's regeneration begins, haltingly, in the late 1980s and accelerates through the 1990s. The Albert Dock, closed since 1972, its magnificent Victorian warehouses standing empty, leaking, slowly degrading, is restored and reopened in 1988. The Tate Liverpool moves in. The Merseyside Maritime Museum. Beatles' story. The city reinvents itself around its own history. The history that it spent decades being ashamed of, the slave trade, the poverty, the riots, becomes, carefully and incompletely, something to be examined and acknowledged. The International Slavery Museum opens in the Albert Dock in 2007, the bicentenary of abolition. It is the only museum of its kind in Britain. It tells, unflinchingly, the story of what those ships carried and what that carrying cost. In 2008, Liverpool is the European capital of culture. The city that had been written off in 1981, managed decline, encouraged people to move away, puts on a year-long program of events that draws millions of visitors and generates, by any reasonable measure, more genuine cultural energy than almost anywhere else in Europe that year. The population has stabilized. Young people are moving back into the city center. The Georgian terraces of the Georgian Quarter, somehow surviving the clearances, are being renovated. New restaurants, new bars, new galleries in buildings that 40 years ago were standing empty. Liverpool today is a city of about 500,000 people. The wider city region, around 1.5 million. The Three Graces still stand on the waterfront. The Mersey is still grey and wide and fast-moving. The Albert Dock is still there, restaurants and museums now, rather than cotton bales and copper ingots. But the iron columns and the brick warehouses are the same ones that were built in 1846, the same ones that saw the last ships of the slave trade era unloading their legitimate cargo in the years after abolition. Anfield and Goodison Park sit a mile apart in the north of the city, two of the most famous football grounds in the world, their combined histories representing something about Liverpool that is genuinely hard to explain to anyone who didn't grow up here. The way that football is not quite a sport and not quite a religion, but something that the city has made its own in a way that goes deeper than either. The Beatles are everywhere. The Cavern Club, rebuilt after demolition, slightly different from the original, but in the right place on Matthew Street, is full every night. The tourists come from Japan, from America, from Brazil. They stand outside the childhood homes on Fourth Lynn Road and Menlove Avenue, National Trust properties now, both of them, and try to understand how houses this ordinary produced music, this extraordinary. The answer is the city. The answer is always the city. The port made the city rich on the bodies of people who never saw a penny of the profit. The port made the city poor when the trade moved on. The poverty made the music. The music made the city famous in a way that the port, for all its power, never quite managed. There is an accounting in this somewhere. It is not a comfortable one. Liverpool, more than most cities, seems to know that. The Mersey is still moving. It has always been moving. It moved when the first fishing families pulled their boats up onto the bank at the pool. It moved when the slave ships went out and came back loaded. It moved when the cotton ships docked and the dock workers stood at the gate hoping to be chosen. It moved when the cavern shook with noise from Matthew Street. It moves now, past the Three Graces, past the closed dock gates, past the museum that finally tells the story of what the ships carried. The river doesn't forget. Cities can choose what to remember. Rivers don't have that option. Thanks for watching. If this walk through Liverpool moved you, subscribe. And let us know in the comments, which city should we walk through next? We'll see you in the past.